I would now like to welcome General Austin S. Miller, former Joint Special Operations Command Commander, for a fireside chat. The conversation will be moderated by Colonel Chris Costa, former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism, U.S. National Security Council, and Executive Director, International Spy Museum, as they explore lessons from the battlefield, special operations, and 2 decades of counterterrorism.
Scott, it's great to see you. Can you guys hear me all right? It's great to see you, and this is the first opportunity we've had to connect since Doha, Qatar, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes because there is some breaking news. But first, what I want to do as a bit of a preface is really set the stage for our relationship, because it really tracks with the trajectory of terrorism before 9/11 through the present day. So you fought on the streets of Mogadishu in 1993, a la Black Hawk Down. And then you and I worked together in Bosnia, which was really gray zone. It wasn't conflict per se. It was this twilight between peace and war. And then, of course, that set the stage for all the relationships that we built in the Balkans post 9/11. Of course, we didn't know 9/11 was going to happen. And then multiple deployments, we bumped into each other working on the same problems against Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban in Iraq and Afghanistan, respectively. And the last point I would make about our relationship, it's especially since there are themes on hostages and the work to bring hostages home to their families. You work tirelessly on hostages. One particular case we talked about discreetly, without a lot of people knowing that we were working on solutions for Caitlin Coleman. By the way, she will be here at the conference, I think, later today. Okay. Caitlin was held by the Haqqani network, and her children were freed by a Pakistani rescue attempt. But we worked on those things together. And of course, we went from a risk-averse 1990s, to be sure, to a post-9/11 paradigm. And arguably, that whole era ended with the withdrawal in Afghanistan. Arguably, October 7th happened. We're in a new place. So I want to dig deeper and hear from you. That's what the audience wants to hear from, to be sure, today. So my first big question, if you want to address the idea of reconciling great power competition and counterterrorism, can you do both?
So first of all, thanks, Chris. I've got a couple things I want to say. I'll answer that question. I'll circle back to it. The Caitlin Coleman comment, it's probably lost on a lot of people, but you are taking some risk when you have the JSOC commander basically bypassing the CENTCOM commander, the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and working with somebody in the up in the White House at the same time to try to resolve a problem that's getting stuck with the deputies and the principals of just what are we going to do there. And there's actually a pretty big story about it. Until you brought that back up, I had forgotten about that. But I remember probably about 3 or 4 tireless nights or no sleep nights going through trying to resolve that thing. Also, if you look up here, they're in the wings. Sean, I can't see you if you're up there, so I don't know who's here from the Combating Terrorism Center. But you got some West Point cadets, and for those you don't know, the demographic there is 18 to 22. There may be people a little bit older, but what jumps out at me on, here we are in 2025, is Ahmad Shah Massoud was talking about his father. I actually remember reading a small blurb when he was killed or attacked, and then his death was announced, I think maybe a day later, on the 10th of September, 2001. But here we are 24 years later at ground zero, and it's, to me, I come up here. That's my thing. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to be with the firefighters. I'm going to be with the first responders, because of the different days we had in our subsequent careers. We didn't have a day like this. And so actually draw inspiration, but then I also start recognizing how I'm starting to age out of the problem. And I look, again, maybe you guys are taking as a minor, maybe even somebody's taken the terrorism course, combating terrorism course as a major. They weren't born when this happened. And so you wonder about the emotional connection, which certainly people close to here, the subsequent fight, that emotional connection's there. But I just say that up front. And of course, Ollie, thank you for inviting me once again, and Chris, same. And thanks for putting this on. Then as I recognize I'm an older person, and I don't want to just attack policies of things that I really don't influence necessarily today, I've often thought that when you talk about great power competition and terrorism, you have to be able to do both. I just believe that. Now, as you look at, I think a likely thesis to come out here is we're just not paying attention to it like we used to. It was always in the headlines. It was always very well funded. The intel services were very dedicated to stopping an attack against the United States of America, and certainly our homeland, our interests, but also protecting allies. And it's just not talked about it a little bit as much. So you can say the attentiveness has waned for certain. But I look at it now as it's a security paradigm. And, you know, I think we're going to talk a little bit about it when you start talking about concerns there. But terrorist activities, violence, by state and non-state actors, and in some cases domestic terrorism, that is out there all the time. You know, the group I finally departed as I left Afghanistan that I was greatly concerned about was ISIS. One, because I had a very practical experience against ISIS, both in northern Syria, certainly in Afghanistan, and I thought it was a very formidable group that was quite dangerous to us in the United States of America. So I think you have to do both, and you can argue whether we've got the right attention on it or not.
I appreciate that, and thanks for calling out the West Point crew that's here. Now I'm doubly intimidated because we're aging out, and we've got to leave our legacy has to be with the future of the CT fight. That said, I want to go back for a second because CTC Sentinel did interview me, my exit interview out of the White House, and one of the things I said, you just reinforced this idea that we've got to be able to do both. It's not an either-or proposition. We're in the same spaces countering Russia and China. We can do CT. It's about relationships. It's about being present. So I think it's not an either-or proposition. I think that's...
I saw your article. I actually agree with that fully, what you wrote there.
That's the only real legacy from my time in the White House. Otherwise, you wouldn't have known what we did that first year. Of course, you did because we were engaged.
But everybody acknowledges the world feels pretty dangerous today.
Yeah.
It just, when I talk to, whether it's cadets or the active force, and they talk to me about what's different, I said, you know, don't get me wrong. We were in a lot of violent encounters, but it feels just more dangerous today, perhaps more unstable, and maybe more unexpected events on our horizon.
Yeah, speaking of unexpected events, and I alluded to it right before we came out on the stage, there was some reporting that Israel has reportedly conducted strikes against the political arm of Hamas in Doha. Don't hold me to that, but really that underscores another escalation. And the question I was going to ask, and we talked about briefly, is this whole idea of the fall of Assad in Syria, Syrian instability, the relationship to the axis of resistance as a result of Hezbollah losing some of its teeth, unhappy that they might lose their weapons with a reinforced Lebanese army trying to take their weapons away at some point. all of this dynamic really underscores this notion of instability. So any thoughts on Syria in particular, or more broadly from a regional standpoint, in light of that current story?
Yeah, one of the things Chris and I talked about before was kind of what were my thoughts as you watch the HTS run, and it's broader than HTS run, in the collapse of the Assad regime. And as I said, I mean, I've been retired for 4 years. I'm not in government service. I talk to people in the government. I've oftentimes talked to people that are in the fight, whether that's a Joint Special Operations Command or other places. But the landscape has changed tremendously. You know, I know there are people that are diving into it deep here, and I reach out to Colin quite a lot just to go, what's your thought here as this is happening? But my recognition is, first of all, if you kind of talk about an ingrained belief, which may or may not be true, you know, I'm sensitive to the fact that I might be wrong here. I don't believe that hardcore extremists with expressed goals, terrorists, change. I don't necessarily believe they retire, even if they go on to another position in an organization. And I might be off there, I acknowledge that. And so as I was watching what was happening and the approaches we made to the regime, the new regime in Syria, I think the jury's still out on that one. I actually see the region as more opaque. Certainly IDF actions and their intel service actions across the region has changed the landscape. Is it a permanent change, or is it a temporary change based on what they've done? So I look at that, and I often come up with more questions than I do answers on that. But I think perhaps more opaque, and when something is opaque to me, maybe it's a little bit of my background, I start getting nervous. I start getting nervous about what I'm not able to see in terms of how it might affect either our forces or our interests, or even our homeland in some cases.
No, I appreciate your insights on Syria, this disrupted landscape, and I want to remind some folks, I don't expect folks to remember necessarily that last year I spent a lot of time talking about Syria as a metaphor at this forum. So who could have known that a few months later the Assad regime would have fallen and we would have more of a disruption in the region? But at the time, what I said is in 2017, hosted by Israel, I went to the Golan Heights, and from there, looking down on the plain into Syria, I recognized that that really was a metaphor for great power competition. You had Russians on the ground at the time, this access of resistance from Iran. They continue to send weapons into Lebanon, and now we know they sent a lot of weapons also to Gaza. So again, completely disrupted. The region is unstable. I just think it portends for more danger in the region.
It does. We were saying this in 16, 17, when we watched the ISIS run, and I'm sure some of you were saying it before, when we watched the ISIS run really throughout the Levant, and I know we probably have some UK practitioners and people in the audience here, I say your ancestors' maps were completely redrawn in 16, 17, and perhaps never to be put back in the same way ever again. And it's just again, it's unsettling for someone like me who's grown up with this approach of, you looked at a set of maps and those maps were the truth, and you realize now they're not the truth anymore. There's something different that's happening out here. And so I would apply that not just to the Middle East, but there's other parts of the world too where I think the maps are changing quite a lot.
And certainly the landscape from a policy standpoint is changing. We might have an opportunity to talk a little bit about that as well. But I want to go to the big question, because I think the audience really needs to hear insights from you. And I'll offer some thoughts too, but I think you should go first and talk about the enduring lessons from our post 9/11 experience, that era that I articulated that we fought through and certainly did our best through those decades, you know, what were the enduring lessons? What lessons should be sustained? What lessons should we depart with?
Yeah, that's the age-old question. Actually, Chris, if you go back to 2001 and you fast forward to 2021 and you look at the changes in the way we operated, so there was in-stride lessons, and oftentimes with in-stride lessons, you start acting in a way, but you really haven't stopped and done the deep reflection that's necessary. For us, for the Afghan veterans, it's obviously beyond Afghanistan. You've got the Afghan War Commission now starting to really gear up here, and I'll be interested to see. It's going to be a big volume. What they come up with if they're able to find those lessons. Now, what's uncomfortable about lessons learned, at least from my perspective, is sometimes it's uncomfortable because you have to think about, well, maybe I wasn't doing it right. Maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe I could do it a little bit differently. I looked at our approach, we'll talk CT, just kind of narrow the topic. Certainly technology would change over the 20 years, and we'd have other ways of bridging one of the most difficult pieces, which is finding the people you're looking for. But we were very basic in 2001, and we would learn along the way. But if I go back to what I thought was, I don't know if we'll see this again, go back to the 04, 08 timeframe, we'll just use Iraq in this case. And it was the emergence of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And that was combat every single night, if you recall. It was 20, 25 operations, largely Sunni triangle, not Shia focused. But I don't know that we did that right. And I go back and I think I would say I'm proud of the work that we did, but I don't know if we did it completely right. And so as I've looked at it, I think it was potentially too dispersed of an effort. Everybody wanted to get in on the fight, so you're farming out assets. And I know we've learned with trying to attack terrorist networks, it's got to be a relentless focus. And it's got to be a relentless focus in the analytical stage. It's got to be a relentless focus in the learning stage. It's got to be a relentless focus in the attack stage. It's got to be relentless in the exploitation phase. And I equate it to almost, perhaps you want to fight these networks in a phone booth. Bring them into a phone booth and fight them there. And it's a tough fight, but fight them there and then perhaps move somewhere else. Because as I looked back on it, we were in Mosul, we were in Al-Anbar, certainly in Baghdad, Ramadi, the Al-Anbar province, Diyala, but we were very dispersed. And I'm not sure that we didn't have a lot of activity and in some cases not the right results. So there's, as a practitioner, a lesson. But we also learned in the intel apparatus, it has to stay on it, focused on it 24/7. And that's potentially something that we've dropped in this when you talk about the competing requirements of a great power competition. And when you lose that focus, you can't help but becoming less smart. And what we also have learned about these networks, just because you're not doing anything, there's no press on them, no one's talking about them, doesn't mean they're sitting still. And we learned that post what I call the fight one against Al-Qaeda in Iraq, when we saw the emergence of ISIS. ISIS in the Levant, there was quite a few people who had been in our detention system from 2005 to 2008. And as they emerged, it was oftentimes, when I came back to JSOC in 2016, as you looked at the names, oftentimes the photo you had was somebody who had been at Camp Bucca. So they'd come through the prison system, the detention system, and then you saw the rise of ISIS with something else that had come on. But I'm not confident in lessons learned. I mean, I think we learn them generationally. I think that what's a lesson for you, Chris, and for Chris Miller may not be a lesson for the next generation. They almost have to learn it themselves. I will say this, and I do stay in touch at the tactical and operational level. They're better, certainly better than I was. I think as a force, they're better in terms of working these types of missions, which are difficult at best. So I think tactical and operationally, those lessons still remain, but what you have to watch is it's not just a tactical operational problem set. If you don't have this throughout intertwined throughout your government, you're going to have problems. You're just going to. We can kill all day long, but if you don't put a few other pillars against this, that's all you're going to do is you're going to kill all day long. You've got to find a way to bring this to a, maybe not a conclusion, but bring it down to a level that's, one, manageable, and I know we want zero violence, but tolerable.
No, I appreciate your thoughts on that. I want to go back to the Afghan War Commission for a second, how important that was. I didn't realize, and we didn't have a chance to talk about this, how cathartic it was and difficult it was to go back and talk through experiences in Afghanistan. I was there first in 2003. It didn't stop to the mid-2000s. Each time it was a different war, it was different lessons, different experiences. I didn't know how draining it was, but I really applaud the effort to go back and look and assess at what we did and what we didn't do.
I've already told them they're going to be like my therapist.
Oh, did you really?
We've gone through session one and really just trying to outline it. And for those of you who don't know me, I don't have a great attention span. You know, we'll hit about 25 minutes. I'll be off to the next event that's because of who I am. And when I talked to the team there, I said, guys, we've got a lot of years to cover, and I'm not sure I've got the patience to sit for interview after interview. So yeah, I can imagine.
It's a lot, right?
It's quite a lot.
So I want to make a point that I hadn't planned on making, but again, for our West Point crew here especially, some argue that our focus is too heavily reliant on strategies developed to counter the threats that we dealt with. In other words, my assessment is there has been a bit of revisionist history and hand-wringing over how we handled post 9/11, a second guessing of strategies, of even tactics. But remember, in this audience more than anyone can testify here at this sacred ground, we didn't have a 9/11. So as much as we want to beat ourselves up on mistakes made, there was no 9/11. We kept the enemies on their heels. Yes, there are tactical errors that were made, and I'm glad you mentioned Chris Miller, because my only laugh line today was John Miller, Chris Miller, Scott Miller. All my favorite Millers are right here in this audience. And it was Chris Miller that actually sustained the first Trump strategy in 2018. It was a really sound strategy, and in some quarters we were criticized because it was just so conventional. But the point was, it worked. And I don't know what future strategies will look like, but we still haven't even recognized, and I want to hear from you the last couple minutes, if you think we have recognized the threat as it manifests today, and really, what do you worry about? What is most worrying to you, Scott Miller, on CT?
Yeah, I want to hit on the strategy piece just very quickly, and I'm conscious of the time here, so I'll come back to my concerns. By the way, I didn't volunteer to go to Afghanistan in 2018. I was pretty happy as the Joint Special Operations Commander when I was pulled to come in here, and I'd followed HR's work on that strategy. And for those of you who have read government strategy documents, they're very, very long. And you really have a difficult time translating that to, soon-to-be lieutenants or sergeants. It's very difficult to, what are we doing here? Why are we doing? Why are you doing what you're doing on the ground here? But within that document, there are some classified objectives as well, so we won't touch those. But it was pretty clear to me that protecting the homeland, or if you will, if you're explaining it to somebody from the 10th Mountain Division, protecting your home actually was one of the objectives. It was one of the reasons why we had Americans, and then of course NATO adopted it as well on the ground. And then it talked about a political outcome, which obviously the political outcome was not the outcome that we wanted. But I've said before, if you don't have some idea of where you're going politically, you're going to keep soldiers on the ground for a very, very long time, and it's really hard to decide when you've met those outcomes. So I have about a minute left here, and so I will talk just a little bit about my concerns, and I'll put it in the category of violence as opposed to just terrorism. I think the means for violence, and it's hard to picture something different. We had hijacked aircraft crashing into two buildings, literally where we sit today. That was exceptionally violent. As I've watched the evolution of the forces on the ground, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's a drug cartel, whether it's a other non-state actor that's out there, the means for violence are just there. And one of the things that concerns me, I tell people, I said, I like tech, I see the opportunities in tech, but it concerns me. And tech, let's take drones, let's take robots, let's marry it up with AI, and I tell people we're already there. It's just we haven't necessarily put it together, but it doesn't mean our adversaries have not put that together. And that is something that, as we just think about violence or a terrorist act, that's something that could potentially hurt us in the future. And why do I worry about it? Really what I said at the outset, I think we're behind. I think we're behind in our acquisition. I think we're behind in our protection. And really what we're relying on right now is just no one's done it to us yet, at least not in a big way. Those concern me. That's the future. There's also other people in the audience here that are the future, and that's what doesn't concern me.
All right, Scott, you should get the final word, and you did. It's important to thank everyone. This has been a great talk. You know, you're a great friend, and this is a great privilege to be here. Ali asking me to have a fireside chat with a friend and a warrior. It's great to see you again. Thank you very much.
I liked it, Chris.